everything else on Twitter, right?
Exactly.
All right. Showing the responses, but now I can't show the little shortened URLs. So for the last people to come in, for the last time, goo.gl/5h8ywh.
If you would like to contribute your responses to our informal poll.
Okay, so we've got about a third Gmail, just over half Outlook, and 10 other. All right, so those 10% other. So for those of you who responded other, what is other?
Our students have Gmail, but faculty and staff have Outlook.
Okay, so it's split like as some of you have reported. So students get the Gmail, faculty staff have Outlook. Yes?
You asked a question in regards to like accessing your email?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you use? So some of you have split, but for the most part, yes?
Well, actually, you phrase it as what your institution uses.
Yeah, for email now. That's why.
Professionally.
The question is the institution uses Outlook, but I have a rule that immediately bounces all my email to Gmail, so I never go into my Outlook box. I only use Gmail.
Did we see that quite a bit before we switched to Gmail?
And actually, our students requested Gmail for that reason. They were already doing that for the most part.
So, but if people use Outlook, what is the backend system you're using?
Exchange.
Because you can use Outlook to
Yeah.
We use Gmail at the law school, but our campus we sit on is still using Novell Plus.
Oh, wow.
Novell?
Right now, we're not using anything.
Is the Wi-Fi dead?
So
We're doing server maintenance.
Okay.
So group-wise is kind of the DeLorean answer, right? It's the one that takes it back.
Lotus. All right, whatever it wants to do. It wants to stick over there. That's fine. All right. So, hi, my name is Deborah Ginsberg. I'm the Educational Technology Librarian at Chicago Kent.
And I am Emily Barney. I am the Technology Development and Training Librarian.
All right, and we are most of the library technology group at Chicago Kent. And one of the things we've been doing over the last couple of years is we've been training our faculty, staff, and we're now adding students to different ways that they can use Gmail and Google Apps for education for their professional use. So we've been concentrating on different things that Google can do. So when we're talking about Google+, we're not talking about the social network. Who here is on Google+?
How many people use it on a regular basis?
One down.
All right.
Only in the abstract, because Google is always using it on my behalf.
Otherwise. Thank you, Google. Google's sometimes only a little bit creepy, but it does a lot of great things. There are a lot of great tools. So we're talking about Google, Gmail, plus all the other things it can do. Also, you'll see a lot of driving metaphors for Google Drive. So we understand our iconography works really well for last year's theme. So next year, you can expect for our presentation to have a lot of things about surfing.
Even though there might be mountains involved in where we actually are, we'll see.
We'll see. So, yeah, but there are a lot of great tools and tricks. We'll go through some of them. And at the end, if you'd like demos of any particular ones, we'll try to show you what some of these can do.
We cannot demo the driverless car. I'm sorry.
You gonna let us advance?
Or we got to use the clicker. We're still figuring out the classroom
Technology.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
We have another survey.
Next survey. Why are you here? What is it you want to know? Because there's all kinds of different levels of knowledge that people have about Google or different ways they're using it. So tell us a little about what you want to know. So goo.gl, that's Google's URL shortener. W4, capital J, capital Y, 4E. Anyone want to tell us what it is you want to know, what you're hoping to learn here today? I can pick on people. I know some of your names.
I'll answer that.
Sure.
So our university has been slow to allow faculty into the Google world because of legal. It's freaking lawyers, you know.
That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Yeah. So our faculty right now aren't allowed to have even Google education accounts. And what we're finding is students have loved their Google accounts with Richmond. And I think we switched them out maybe 4 years ago, maybe. So they're using Google Drive like crazy, and they want to do all this collaboration with the faculty members. So the faculty are having to create another Gmail account, basically, so they can communicate. So I'm not sure how we're securing data. You know what I mean? It just seems kind of silly to me.
This sounds all very familiar. So yeah,
So yeah, I'm interested in listening so I can go back and sound more intelligent than I typically do. We should go ahead and just push forward with this.
Right, so you're an example where faculty don't have access to Google Apps for Education, but the students are using it to an extent that it would be really helpful for the faculty. I'm repeating because to get it on the recording. And you know, the more you learn about what Google can do, the better you can make your case.
Yes.
I teach my faculty Google. My faculty. I am the educational technology librarian at Spreadsheet School, and I teach faculty their Google products. And I think it would be a lot more intuitive for everybody if we were all in the same system that made these things work.
And we'll actually,
across the board.
yeah, we will absolutely be mentioning the benefits of Google Apps for Education as opposed to private Gmail accounts, because there's so many things that you can limit to your network, which increases the security, increases the privacy. It just functions a lot better for how education works. And you know, honestly, sometimes you have the same people who are frightened of Google's privacy policies who are then saying, oh, if you want to get around this, go and sign up for a personal Gmail account. Personal Gmail accounts do have a slightly different terms of service than an education account. We can't get into the legal details because that's what our general counsel handles. That's not something that we were managing. But it is definitely something to consider.
If I can get to this, you better luck than me to get the responses. Let's see what you're saying. Better coordination than me.
So
once
we have, let me see if I can get this laser pointing working. I want to know more about Google Apps for my personal use. That is about a third of the people. We are moving to Google Apps at our institution, one person. And for that, we'll touch on what we did last year. I am working on Google Apps training materials, 3 people. And I want to know more about Google Apps for my professional use is over half of you.
So great, we're going to cover all of these things in some amount of detail, but let's start with last year. Okay, we can get back to our little presentation. So last year, we talked about the transition that we did for Google Apps for Education from Outlook. And again, Sejal and her team were instrumental with this, and we worked closely to provide training materials for the faculty and staff. So our presentation last year at CaliCon discussed that transition, all the different policy issues that were involved, what our IT did, what we did to train people to get them started. So if that's where you're at for the one person who's there, you'll want to take a look at our materials in our video from last year posted on the Cali 13 site.
So we have the link to the slides and the video and so forth there.
Also, a caveat for this presentation, your mileage may vary. So we have certain resources that are available in our Google Apps for Education. And it's up to the administrators what resources are going to be available. And it depends on what makes sense for the policies at your institution. So we're going to talk about the resources that we have available, how we use them, how we push them into new directions. You may find that at your institution, certain resources are available that we don't have, and you'll find ways to use them, or you may find certain resources are not available to you because that was the decisions made by your council, your administrators for that particular space of your institution.
And for us, we're working with Sejal, of course, at Chicago Kent, but she's also working with our main campus because they were the ones who started and initiated the original transition to Google Apps for Education. So you may have institutional policies that govern even beyond the law school.
Also note that there is a basic package of Google Apps for Education that comes with things like Gmail and Calendar and Drive. And then there are additional Google features that you may be used to using, like Google Hangouts, which are not part of Google Apps for Education, not the basic part. They can be enabled by your administrator, but they have a different terms of service. So this may make your administrators leery of adding common tools like Hangouts unless they have a chance to investigate it. We'll be talking about our experience with Hangouts a little later. So again, you may have access to more services or fewer depending on what your administrators decide.
And I can't give you a complete preview of what it looks like to be the administrator for Google Apps because, as I mentioned, this is managed by other people, but I figured I would log in and give you a brief look at this. I use Google Apps for my community garden website. Obviously super techie, right? We just wanted an email address that I could transfer to somebody else and not use my personal one. So this is what it looks like for business. That isn't necessarily what it looks like for education. Keep that in mind. I don't have an .edu domain of my own for some reason. Really? When you're talking about Google Apps, this is what it looks like for the manager for a really basic one. As you can see, the status for these is on for everyone or always on. If for some reason for my community garden I really didn't want them to use a calendar, I could turn it off. So as we mentioned, that's where we're getting into the your mileage may vary. If you are not an administrator and you're wondering why something isn't working, it's also helpful to keep in mind, and this is useful for personal use as well, if you're having trouble. Last week on June 4th, people were having a lot of trouble with Google Drive. If you were on Twitter, you probably saw that.
Did anyone have trouble with Google Drive on June 4th?
For instance, I was working on preparing a training presentation on Google Drive. Good timing. So they'll have information about service disruptions and so forth on the app status dashboard, so that's worth a bookmark.
So one resource you are very likely to have, of course, if you have Google Apps for Education, is Gmail. It's been around for 10 years. According to some sources I've seen, it's now as popular as Outlook. So even though here it's about a third, out in the world it is more popular. We understand that in most law firms, Gmail is not commonly used. ABA does have materials on using Google Drive and Gmail for lawyers. That information is available through their books. They have like a Gmail in an hour, for example. But we understand it's not used as much in law firms. That said, students really love Gmail, and they use it all the time, and they have a pretty good idea of how it works, and that's one of the reasons we use it a lot here. So when we switched, part of the reason was because the students were demanding that we provide them with this service. We also switched, as we mentioned, because our main campus used it, our faculty were using it, doing things similar to what you've mentioned, forwarding their email, and the price is right. What, free? Free. Versus an Exchange server, which we had to replace, which can cost many thousands of dollars.
So even though a lot of people have already been using Gmail, I mentioned early on, I don't drive. I have a learner's permit, guys. Road trips, it's worth it. Otherwise, I take public transit. If you've been using one system for a long time, and many of our faculty, we're experts in using their email. Of course, it's a bulk of your workday. Most people are going to spend a lot of time in email. Moving from one thing to another can make you feel like a beginner again. It's an entirely different mental model, and it's worth it, even if you're comfortable with Gmail. Show some sympathy for people who are just getting used to a new system. It really does make a difference if you can understand how difficult that transition is when it is your daily process.
Also, those of you who have made the transition, did you find that it was very different using email personally and professionally? Found some things I had to change. So that came up a lot, where people were used to the basic settings and then tried to figure things out for their professional workflow, and then we ran into some training issues, and we'll talk about some of the ways we solved those. All right, so is this a video game controller or an actual car steering wheel? Anybody? What is it? Car steering wheel for a Lotus.
Race car.
Right. So can you imagine trying to figure out how this steering wheel works, where everything is? This is what it was like for many of our users using Gmail, even using Gmail professionally for the first time. And eventually they figured out what all the settings did and where they all fit. And then they would come back one day and the settings would be moved to different locations. They would be made smaller and more minimalist. So they finally figured out only to sit down in the car one day and see the steering wheel look completely different. So this is, again, what we've been incorporating into our training. Here are things you can do, and this is where it's going now and where it's likely to go next. This has been another challenge in training our users to use Gmail and Google Apps.
So, and we covered some of this last year in our presentation, but a lot of the initial questions we got, like I said, are very much about the interface. It's very much about your daily process. So these are things that probably a lot of you, whatever your tool is, are doing something like this. You may be using folders, you may be using filters, you may be using flags, you're probably using search, although if you're in Outlook, I'm sorry. And notifications, things that pop up to tell you you've got a new email. So how do we do training for that? Again, like I said, it's very much a mental model sort of thing. So it's showing people that the same functionality is available, sometimes with differences. Sometimes those differences are significant if that's something you really depend on. But really basic things like, hey, all of your folders did import. They are now labels. Let me show you how to use them. Filters, there are two ways of getting to that. They're very powerful. They're great. We're going to go ahead at the end of our presentation and do some demos if people want to stick around. So if there's anything specific that we're covering when we talk about these that you're like, that's the thing I need to know, let us know. We'll also have a handout that links to some of our training materials. Flagging items, that's a star. Searching, hallelujah, searching is so much better. And notifications, there are different ways to do that depending on what browser you're using. So for example, again, talking about interface, if you're using Outlook and you suddenly switch over to this and somebody tells you, oh, the search is awesome, and you try to use it and you're like, it's not as awesome as you're telling me, well, it's probably because there's a super minimalist little tiny arrow here that if you click on it, opens up this big box that is super helpful. It lets you do things like check off if it has an attachment or if the size is a certain time, or maybe you're like, I remember it was last week, I don't remember which day it was, who it comes from, all of these things that really are fairly intuitive once you start using it. And if you're a super Google Apps user, once you type that in, it's going to preload stuff into your search bar and you can start to learn what the keywords are, like from, colon, whatever name, and be even faster without having to open the box. But it is a Google product. Search should be awesome. Other things to keep in mind that were big changes between Outlook and Gmail were things that people had not been used to. So conversation view was very unintuitive to a lot of people. Formatting messages is something that they had set up a long time ago and they couldn't figure out where that was. Chat, again, is something completely brand new if you're using Gmail for the first time. And signatures are something that people had set up. So a lot of these are buried in the settings and just helping people get that set up. It doesn't have to be a long, complicated thing. It can just be like, here it is, let me guide you through it, and you'll be fine.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sure. Just because I don't have Gmail at work, but with the chat feature, say, can you guys all chat with whoever's in your Active Directory, basically, who's ever in your...
Unless they've turned it off, personally,
Okay.
because they don't want to use it.
So if you're trying to...
You have to request access to a person sometimes. There's different ways of customizing the settings if you aren't someone who wants to chat all the time. Our professors were a little leery of having their students able to contact them whenever they were online, so they wanted to make sure that they could hide their status. But those of us that are here to provide services a lot of times want to make sure it's turned on. So when I was doing training, I made sure to demo how easy this was, and I was like, you guys can turn it off, but I'm going to leave it on, so feel free to chat with me right now.
Right.
And a lot of times they did.
I also find that in chat, it tends to be enabled for people that I tend to be communicating a lot. Person appears, I can communicate with people in my network, like Emily. I can communicate with people out of my network, like my husband. Everyone is right there that I would want to chat with in the chat space. So as Emily says, if I don't have as strong a communication with them, I have to request.
So can you also set up like chat groups? So say the whole university has Gmail.
Can we get to this
Oh,
at the
sorry.
end? That's okay. This is
We'll talk more about chats later. There's lots it can do, but we'll get to specific things. So number one demo, chat.
Okay.
All right, so we found ourselves having to push Gmail into two different directions. A lot of people had questions about how do we make it look like Outlook. As I said, they had a workflow that worked in Outlook and they needed to replicate that now that we were in Gmail. The other question was, all right, we've got this Gmail, it's new, it's exciting, what can it do that Outlook can't do? And we found that a lot of the answers to both those questions were found in the labs. So Gmail labs, I know some can go away, though I haven't had that happen yet with some of my favorite labs. They've been around. Sometimes they can get integrated into Gmail. Sometimes they'll add new ones. Haven't seen it for a while. But the Gmail labs can be a great way to add some additional functionality, making it more like Outlook or making it a brand new product.
Here are a few examples, and labs are buried in settings. If you've never turned on any labs at all, we can do a demo for that as well. So some of the most popular ones that replicate Outlook functions are undo send, which basically puts a quick pause on your email. When you click send, it's going to hold it for a little bit and you get a little message. So if you're somebody who is typing really quickly and you hit enter and you realize you didn't get a subject line in there or something like that, it helps. Or if you realize you meant to send another thing, you can always click undo. But you do have to turn that on once. Once it's in there, you can do a little bit more configuration. Preview messages is something people asked for at first because they were used to having that preview pane on in Outlook. Honestly, I haven't heard very many people ask about it after that first transition because Google does have that automatic preview that shows you the first line of the message, and most people are pretty comfortable with that. Canned responses was our solution for people who had different signatures for internal versus external emails or something like that. It was also useful to people in departments like career services that were sending out the same reminder to different groups of students frequently, they could preload that message and send it out as a template, just pop it right into their email. And read requests. For some people, that was an important part of their workflow. Going beyond Outlook, these are new features. Again, if you're using chat and you do like it, you don't have it turned off, but you also have a lot of labels. You may find yourself kind of struggling with that, so it's very nice that there's a lab that lets you, if you have a big enough monitor, move chat to the other side. Calendar widget, again, if you're using calendar quite a bit and you want to have everything on your homepage in Gmail. Unread email count is something that's available depending on which browser you're using. I find that helpful if you are trying to do inbox 0. That's good, so that when you have a lot of things open, you can see when something new is added to your inbox. And auto advance, if you're going through and you're archiving or deleting things and you just want to make that process a little faster. There's a few things like that that they're very small changes, but they can make your life a little less hectic.
Now, Gmail doesn't offer everything we want to do within it, that even things we want, either things we wanted to replicate in Outlook or some new features that we might want to do. So, for example, who's used Outlook to format really pretty emails using HTML?
It's not a common request, but some people do need it.
But it comes up, and Gmail doesn't handle that well. And who here uses getting things done kinds of tools to help keep your inbox to inbox 0?
That's a more common question.
That's a more common question we get. That's something I used, and I had installed something in Outlook to help me, and then I had to find another thing in Gmail that might push it even farther, and I did. So, for formatting emails.
We were actually using MailChimp before. MailChimp is used for newsletters and mailing lists and things like that. You can use it for free. When we were using Outlook, this was a template that we downloaded that we were using Dreamweaver to create the content, and then we would send it using Outlook. As soon as we got Gmail, we were ready to send another newsletter, and we were like, where did that go? So instead, what we ended up doing was creating the content without using Dreamweaver on the MailChimp website, and we didn't need to use it to manage a mailing list. So our newsletter editor creates it on the website, sends it to herself as a test, and then uses that to forward it on to other people. So there are solutions, especially if you're already using a tool to do something that's a little unusual. I'm sure somebody out there has probably found a workaround, or you can contact us if you have a question. This is for Debbie.
Right. So who has ever had tens of thousands of emails in their inbox, or may have it right now? That was driving me up a wall. I couldn't find anything. I wasn't sure what I dealt with or what needed to be dealt with. Nothing was where it belonged, even when we transferred over to Gmail. Unfortunately, those tens of thousands of emails that were in the folder inbox now had the label inbox and were still there. And I was going nuts. I needed to handle it. There you see is inbox 1. How do I do that? I use a tool called Active Inbox. It's a subscription tool. It's $40 a year. It is an add-on to a browser like Chrome or Firefox that adds additional functionality to Gmail. And with it, I can do all kinds of things with the email that comes in. First thing, of course, I do with my emails, I filter it. I use those Gmail filters that Emily mentioned to get rid of garbage. Then I start using Active Inbox, and I can assign emails to a project. I can assign emails to a priority. I can give emails a due date, so I know when I have to finish replying to those emails, and then I can get them out of the box and use the new labels that the emails have, the due date labels, the project labels, the priority labels, to address different emails, and it helps keep everything organized and clean. And it even includes tools within the email itself to assign a due date, to assign a project or priority, so I can handle each email individually, or bulk if I'd like to.
And Debbie's using this as an advanced user. There are free versions and there are demo versions. Not anymore.
Nope.
You can at least do a demo.
You can do a demo, but they used to offer a free version, and last year they stopped doing that, so that's a different thing. So it's a handy tool. I love it. It keeps things on task.
If you decide to drop it later, it is using the internal labels within Gmail. So you would still have those folders in existence for your projects and stuff like that. So it doesn't actually, if you got rid of the tool, you wouldn't lose all of that organization.
Oh, and I forgot one of my favorite things. I can give labels to emails I'm sending. So if I send an email and I want to make sure I get a follow-up of that email later, I give it a date. On that date, it shows back up in my date label. Oh, I haven't got response to that yet, so now I should go do a follow-up. Really handy tool to keeping things on track and organized.
Debbie, is that something you can download onto more than one computer?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can use it on your personal account and your professional account. It lets you use it on 2 accounts. So, and you can buy bulk licenses for more than 1 person. So this has been a handy thing. I love it.
Moving on to calendar, again, obviously that's something that Debbie uses to manage a lot of her tasks. A lot of people weren't necessarily doing that all in their inbox, but they were doing it with calendar, and it was pretty key to their day-to-day work. So,
Particularly the clinic.
yes, people get into calendar and then they start to realize, oh, this is really collaborative. And maybe they were using Outlook to do some of these functionalities as well. I'm not dividing that the same way that I did for Gmail, because it depends on the person how complicated they want to make it. But the first question when we start to talk about how easy it is to do things like sharing is, okay, who has access? So by default, as soon as you move out of email, everything is set to private for only you. But you can start scaling that out. You can add specific people. You can share it with your specific network, so we can share it with people at Chicago Kent if we want to, in whatever level of detail we're comfortable with, just when we're busy, or specifics about where we are if we wanted to. You can also do things that are super useful, like creating separate calendars. So that was something that was valuable to a lot of our professors who might want to set up one calendar that has when they're in classes, and that's available to the students, but whatever else they're doing, for I have a doctor's appointment, I need a reminder, that goes on a different calendar that their students would never see. So it's a very useful tool. Can you share editing access? Absolutely. Can you invite people to an event? This is a different question that we're getting from, for instance, our alumni department. They needed to contact a lot of people outside of our network. So it's one thing for our faculty to say, I want to make sure that this can go to the students. When we're all on the same system, who cares? It's going to work. But if you're sending it to alumni, some of them are going to use Outlook, some of them may be using whatever's on their phone, something like that. It does attach files when you send an event invitation to anyone that works in multiple systems. So it doesn't have to require that somebody else set up a Google Calendar in order to add that event to their own calendar when you send an invitation. Here's an example of all of the calendars that I currently have when I click on my calendar. So I have my personal one. I have a couple ones that I use for if somebody's asking if they can access a room and I'm in charge of scheduling that. I have some that we use, and I can put a description on here if I need to remind myself. So we have one for repetitive tasks in our group, things like updating computers or remembering to put things away. We have a reference calendar that we use to schedule the desk and to know when people are out at the office. And I'll give you a few examples of these later. I can go into what types of notifications I can get. I can choose who has access to it, and I could unsubscribe if this was a group calendar that somebody else added me to. I'm like, I don't get involved in this anymore. So the settings, again, are worth going through for all of these tools. So reviewing, once you have all that complicated mess of calendars, how do you keep track of where you are and what you're looking at? Can I change my calendar view? Yes. Can I change the colors? Yes. Can I print my calendar? Yes. Can I search my calendar? Oh, yes. So much better. And can I view other people's calendars? And that's something that, I mean, obviously, some people, once they get into sharing, they start thinking, oh, I have to have access to this calendar. You don't need to have access as an editor to view other people's calendars. But if they have set it to be very private, you may not be able to see very much. So you can search for someone's name if you're trying to set up a meeting and see when they're available, depending on how much information they choose to share with you. So this is an example that I did last night of next week on my calendar. So I have several of them turned on, not all of them, so computer room reservation isn't on. Red is my calendar, so I'm on vacation for a few days, which means that I don't need lunch, I guess. But I have other events that are going on. I have a workshop that I'm giving. My calendar isn't super complicated. The green one, which is very complicated, is our research librarians' schedule at the desk, and also who's on vacation. So my name shows up there again. And there's other people's, there's some of our task calendars that are on there. So if I wanted to reduce the complication of this, I could choose to view it by day. I could choose to view it as an agenda instead of as a traditional calendar format. I could click on another day if I wanted to jump around really quickly, or I could just start taking some of these off by clicking on them. And if I needed to look up someone else, that's on this side. So there's a lot of very quick customization that you can do.
That green calendar is one, by the way, that all the librarians have access to. So if I'm going to be gone on a day, I just put it on the calendar, and then everybody knows I'm going to be gone. There's no surprises. Where is Debbie? We can't find her. Oh, we've got to look at a particular calendar. It's something that we've all trained ourselves to check, to add information to, so it becomes a collaborative space that we can share vital information, just who's in the office that day and where are you going.
And obviously we're using repeating events and so forth on here. I didn't add physically every single lunch period for myself. I use that so if I have to cancel a lunch or I'm doing something else, I remind myself not to bring something. So editing. There are some nice features in the integration. We're going to talk about integration quite a bit here. If you're looking at an email and it says, hey, let's get together on this date at this time, let's discuss this thing, a lot of times there's an easy way to turn that into an event. You do have to keep in mind it doesn't necessarily fill things in accurately, so double check before it ends up on your calendar on a different date than you thought because you proposed multiple days in your email or something like that. Recurring events are very easy to set up. They're much more intuitive in my perspective than using Outlook because you can have it be like, I want to do it on the first Monday of every month because that's actually how you do it. Or I can say every 3 weeks. You know, you can do it by a lot of different types of repetition. You can attach files to a calendar event if you're using Google Drive. It's not as easy to attach like emails, but you can use an email to create an event, which is more similar to the Outlook feature. And one thing that we did have to do a little bit of training on is some of the differences in terms of who gets notified when you make changes. If you're trying to find a time for it and you do it from an email, anyone who's included in the email gets invited to the event. If you only wanted it on your calendar, let's say you're using it as a task reminder, you don't want to send them all an invitation to that event. It's not actually functioning that way. So keep in mind things like that in terms of notifications and maybe test things out with a safe group that doesn't matter if you're embarrassing yourself the first few times. So here's one feature that I find super useful. This is from calendar settings. I have access, as I showed you, to lots of different calendars. And I added to my notification settings that I wanted to get a daily agenda. So I had to do that for each calendar individually. But now every morning at 5 a.m., I get an email that says, oh, Debbie is going to be at Cali, so am I. All of us are supposed to be at a monthly staff committee meeting. That's obviously not true for a couple of us who are here. And lunch is on our calendar. So sometimes it's repetitive, but it shows you where everybody's supposed to be. So if you have somebody who's given you shared access to that, getting the notifications may be useful if you need a quick update every day.
Even just a quick reminder of what's in your own calendar, which you can send, you can do that as well. So last thing, contacts. Contacts is one of the more difficult things to deal with, partially because the way that Outlook and the kinds of data Outlook contacts can include is not the same as what you can get on Gmail. Not everything could be brought over. We provided plenty of warning and training, and so that wasn't a problem. But we had to get people used to the fact that the contacts worked a little differently. Also, we used a lot of distribution lists, and distribution lists became Google Groups, and they don't work exactly the same way. For example, there's certain kinds of editing we could easily do with distribution lists that we can't do as easily in groups for various reasons. Finally, the Outlook contacts connected to our Active Directory. So if I wanted to look up someone's phone number, I could do it right from Outlook. Gmail doesn't connect in the same way, so now I just got to use the online phone book, which is also in Google Drive, to look up a phone number. So it's still pretty easy.
That may not be a matter of specifically which fields are in the contacts, but a matter of a policy on the place of whoever is entering all that information into contacts. So if our IT department decided that this is a more useful, things are getting out of date and it's not worth transferring things that are out of date, then people get used to change. It's okay. The thing that's harder to get used to, if you're used to being able to click on a contacts icon, is there is no default contacts icon. It's right under that same thing that says Gmail, so that was really hard to train people for. It is integrated. It works really well if you're used to just typing people's names in. That works fine. And the directory is available to everyone. That works fine. But if you wanted to go and look that up because you couldn't remember what somebody's name was, you would have to get used to going to contacts itself. Importing contact groups, as Debbie said, it was not necessarily the smoothest process. We did come up with a very detailed tutorial for how people could get those customized lists of people that they created in Outlook, exported and then imported into Google Contacts. So that was something that was a one-time setup, even if it was a little bit laborious. What if you import groups and people were in more than one group and you just imported the same contact 5 times? That's okay. Gmail did make that super easy, so that's not a big problem. What about groups? Well, as Debbie mentioned, these are the new distribution lists. One thing that didn't happen exactly was, like we said, you could type in a distribution list in Outlook and then click on a little plus sign and it would open it up, and then you could remove a couple people. You can't do that with distribution lists in Gmail or groups. And editing, accessing, and managing them, honestly, that's something that I find fairly confusing. I find the interface is not helpful, but again, I don't do this very often, so fortunately our IT staff are awesome, and we love Heather, and she's really good at answering questions on that. But getting people used to a different way of who has management over this and where do I find these things. For the tools that are a little bit more hidden, you may be using it all the time, and once you're using it, you're fine with it, but editing it is a different question.
They do make great class distribution lists. I'll give it. They're great. So there are a few things we weren't able to answer just because it might be the nature of what Gmail is. So one of my favorite questions we got was, how do I delete my sent items folder? Now, this was someone who in his workflow was used to having an empty sent items folder, but you can't delete sent items in Gmail. Why is that?
It's a status. It's not a location.
Label. Yes, it's a label. So the label sent already exists. It's a status. It's not a place. So we've tried to get them used to the idea of these are not folders like you would think a physical folder is. It works a little bit differently. Also, we had some people who really wanted to use Google Reader, which wasn't initially turned on, and eventually it just went away. So that wasn't something we were ever able to offer. But most of the questions we had to deal with in dealing with the day-to-day workflow from Gmail, calendars, contacts, we were able to answer.
So, moving forward, we've talked about the basic Google apps. Now we're going to talk about the part that is different and more fun for us.
Right, so we were really enjoying Google Drive. Google Drive is what we were really excited to do. When Sejal and Dawn said we were getting Google Apps for Education, we were very excited because Emily and I have been using our personal accounts to share and collaborate on maybe documents. Google Drive lets you collaborate on things like any kind of text document. On this presentation, I might not be there at the same time Emily is, but we're working on the same presentation without having to worry about versions, who's where, when, who's working on what. We can just work, add our images, add our information, add our speaker's notes, whenever was convenient for us, and then work collaboratively in that space. We also found all kinds of things that Drive could do that we were unexpected. For example, Google Forms has been one of our go-to tools. You've seen us use it to answer the short little surveys at the beginning. Emily uses it all the time for RSVPs for her training sessions. It has been a really useful tool to help us get a lot of good responses. We get more responses with the Google Forms RSVPs than anything else we've tried. Finally, we've discovered that Google Drive can handle any kind of file, which faculty are very excited about. They're saying, well, we can put these documents in Google Drive, and we can put the Google Spreadsheets and the presentations, but I can't put a Word document there and share it. Why, yes, you can. Well, I can't put a video there and share it. Yes, you can. And they're getting more excited as they realize more things that Google Drive can do to help them share materials with colleagues, students, and staff.
Google Drive, the basic level, is pretty easy to introduce to people because it's not a drastically different mental model. Yes, a document is very much like a Word document. Yes, a spreadsheet is very much like an Excel spreadsheet. A presentation, like the one we're using right now, if you didn't know anything about Google Drive, you probably would think we're using PowerPoint or some other program that's very similar to that. The user experience is not drastically different. It is sometimes scaled down. So we do talk to people in terms of like, are you using really advanced features? Some of these will be available, some of them won't. Getting into that. What are the new features? And this is what we're very excited to introduce to people because we're starting to see it really improving efficiency and just making life easier. So collaboration, simultaneous editing. Let's demo this.
Yes.
So I'm going to hit escape, and you can start to see I am present in this at the moment, and Debbie can also be present in it.
I actually am, but it's not
You are,
registering.
but on her device, it doesn't show up the same way. Simultaneous editing, we can go into the history of the document. Track changes is only available for documents, not for presentations or spreadsheets. You can do in-document chat, which is this, if I can get the mouse to work. Hello, mouse, move up. Right next to my head.
It's the little icon here.
Does not like me. There we go, show chat. So
Yay.
chat in that sense is not permanent, but if you're both looking at a document, you're in different locations and you have a question, should I put this in, do I not? It's a temporary way of having a conversation around a document. That's super useful. In Hangouts, you can add the audio to that. So if you're not as quick about typing or you want to be able to type in the document and not type separately in chat and go back and forth, you could have that, and I'll show you how in a little bit. Comments, I really like comments. I personally like it even better than track changes. So I added a comment to this as a demo, and Debbie added a reply in there. When she responded to my comment, I got an email. And directly from my email in Gmail, I sent, here's a reply sent from my email, and that's why you see my signature block is in there.
And I got that email.
Yeah,
so
you can have the
notification something had
conversation
happened.
all the time without having to go back into the document. And if we decide, hey guys, this is kind of pointless, click resolve, and it's done, it's out of the way. So I find that more useful for having a conversation around content than actually doing track changes, because a lot of times track changes, it's kind of hard to see who said what and get it out of your way. The fact that it goes into email means you can have a useful conversation. The document doesn't change until you're ready for it to, but you can also go in there and see the history if somebody has editing access. So you can choose in Google Drive whether someone has access to view it only, comment on it, or edit. So you can really narrow that down. And in spreadsheets only, which keep in mind forms, you can have the results go into a spreadsheet. It has the option of turning email notifications on when someone adds something to it. With comments, you get emails in presentations or in documents. You don't get that for somebody editing the actual content. In Excel, or the spreadsheet, I mean not Excel, sorry, my mental model, you do have the option of getting email notifications. So if I'm using a Google form and I'm not getting very good response, if it's something that's just out there in the world and it's going to be there for a long time and I want to make sure I pay attention to people who respond to it, then I can turn on email notifications and I'll get a message saying so-and-so added to this document. And they don't even know they're doing it because they're looking at the form. They're not looking at the spreadsheet, but the data goes into the spreadsheet and I get the message. So that's a very useful feature. Let me see if I can go back to present now that it's behaving. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so as I said, sharing options by default are by user. You can also set it up by network or with links. So we, at this point, have a handout that is shared with anyone who has the link because all of you are not on our network. Certain people who are working with us have access to edit it. You guys only have access to view it right now. We'll share it and we'll change it to comment access afterwards. I don't want everybody going in there and harassing us in the middle of our presentation. No pranksters. And public if you really want it to be that way. And keep in mind too that the editing functions are only available for native Google documents. So the ones that work like documents and spreadsheets and presentations and forms and so forth. Not for things like PDFs or Word documents, although there are ways to convert sometimes from a Word document into a native Google document. And again, that's something we can do a demo for if you want. But you can have a folder of documents and you can share access to that folder only. So you're not having to send people 5 different documents all the time. You just say, hey, it's in here, and whenever you add something to it, it's added to those same sharing permissions. So we found that to be very helpful when you have a more complicated project. And our faculty are using that quite a bit, the folders. Let's say they're in a hiring process and they want to make sure that all of the materials that are coming in go to the people who are on the hiring committee for that position. They're using a folder, and one person gets the email, they add it to the folder, everyone in there can check whenever they need to. And it can be organized in subfolders, etc. What about sharing? You can embed them in emails, and you can do the opposite. If somebody from outside of your system sends you, or someone who still loves Microsoft Office sends you a document, you can save it to your Google Drive, so it's searchable from there. You can also, as I mentioned before, attach them to events. If you have something like that, that would be useful. Hey, I'm going to put my notes in this document. I already know that. I'll attach it to the event, and then people who have access to that can see it. I'll talk about Google Sites. It's super easy to embed Google documents in that, and you can publish it online, and if you have other systems, you can publish those documents and embed them in the site. So I'm doing that, for instance, for some of our student organizations. The SBA has a lot of forums, and they want to make a change like once a year to a due date. I said, let's use Google Drive, because then you can download the document if you want to make an edit, print it out, do whatever you need to, But the person who's in charge of changing that due date just has to go into that one folder and change those things, and it shows up on the website. So if you really start to strategize this, the possibilities are endless. There's also new features all the time. And I would say that for the most part, these have been happy changes. Sometimes people get a little freaked out about changes, but there's add-ons now. So a lot of the people who wouldn't use Google Drive, it was because they were missing specific features from Word. Things like track changes. I love comments. That doesn't mean everybody does. So now you can add track changes to a Google document. I love using the display document map, whatever they're calling it now, navigation pane, in Word, so I can add a table of contents now. That does require, just like in Word, that I use headers, but that's a pretty easy thing to do with formatting in a Google document. There's all kinds of other tools. They have this organized by education and business and utilities and so forth. So they are keeping an eye on who's allowed to create these add-ons, and some of them are companies, that maybe want to have you pay for an upgrade, but you can try it out and see if it works for you.
Does it work the same on your tablet as it does on the computer?
Not in my experience,
Okay.
but something I'll have to explore a little further.
There's always an extra challenge when you're doing it with other
Right.
devices.
Yeah.
Let's get the little simple. All right, we've got 15 minutes. All right. So we described how different ways we can collaborate with Google Docs, but sometimes we want to collaborate on more complicated projects that have a lot of different documents or a lot of different to-do lists, or we want to collaborate using task management, but still want to use some of the tools that are available in Gmail and Google Drive. And we've got one great tool that's within Google Docs itself, and one great tool that's a third-party tool, and we're going to show you quickly both of those.
Yes. So Google Sites, I mentioned briefly, is something that our group has been using for an internal website. I love WordPress. I already presented on WordPress. We have a great CMS. Why are we talking about another website tool? Well, these are the real reasons. Control access. I'll go through these quickly. It's the same way as for Google Drive or something like that. I add a person by clicking on a share button. I can choose who has access to what. So our staff members, our owners, if we have an external email, so this is a sample Gmail that we just use for testing. We can set it up to view the site. If we needed to add somebody temporarily, we could do that, and then we could remove them if we wanted to. And we have a student worker who is at the main IIT thing, so she can edit it, but she can't change who has access to it. And I can remove any of these people at any time, so that's very helpful. What do they need to do to learn how to edit a site? Oh my gosh, so easy. There is a toolbar up at the top. It has a pencil icon, or they are on a site, they press E. What does it look like? It looks almost exactly like that Google document header. Does any of this look super confusing, like you can't use that to add text? I don't think so. The two things that are different, you do have to save. I love Google Drive because it auto-saves and I don't have to think about it. If I close a tab in Google Sites that I've been working on and I never click save, all that work goes away. So that's just for myself. I have to, oh right, I'm back to this. I would love if they changed that. I'm sure they have good reasons. And the other thing is, if you are someone who does like code, you can get into the HTML if you need to. And there's other menus over here that I'll touch on briefly. For instance, formatting that lets you add headers so you don't have to go into the code to structure your document. Integration with other things, again, there's menus up there. So for instance, if I click on insert, there's all kinds of things I can do. If I've used headers, I can create a table of contents. If you guys have ever edited a wiki page and you've seen that on Wikipedia, that there's an automatic table of contents according to each section of the page, I love that feature because sometimes our documentation gets really long. So the fact that I can insert a table of contents, I can just kind of click within it. I can also insert any of these Google Drive things and a lot of other features as well. A calendar, for example. Whoa, where did this just go? Sorry guys, I'm scrolling when I didn't mean to. Other things that are super amazing about, oh come on, present. This is once I insert that document. So a spreadsheet is so much easier to edit than a table in a website. So if I just insert that spreadsheet into my document, I can always go down here at the bottom and click open if I want to start making changes. But if all I want to do is view the spreadsheet, it's right there in the document. They also have content templates that are really intuitive to use. So this is something that I'm using for a process that we have to document. It's little pieces of information that happen on different dates. I can put text at the top to explain to, let's say this is an assignment I give my student worker, what they should do, or notes to remind myself. If I want to customize how this to-do list works, it has a few default things like date and notes, but I can name these things and add different types of fields, text and drop downs and so forth. And then this is what happens when you click on add an item. You get a little box here, so if I'm updating a specific piece of software, I put in the name for it here, the version number. This drop down is something that I pre-populated. So something like that, that's a common task, and I just want to make sure it's documented. I don't want to make it a super big hassle. These to-do lists are really great. Content templates. If you're not getting into a lot of task management, you don't want lots of pop-ups, but you do have information you want your staff to write down, I can create a complicated outline that has all those headings and everything. And once I've set that up, all I have to do is go up to the top where it has that edit thing, click on the gear icon, which is always settings in any Google Apps, and I can click on something down here that says save as a page template. And then from then on, if I want them to add similar types of information, I want to use that outline, it's a page template. I give it a name. When they create a new page, they say use that one, and then all they have to do is fill it in.
So you could even use this in the classroom, for example. All right, you have an outline, students need to fill it in. You create the outline, you share it with a class. That class fills it in. You create another outline copy, you share it with another class.
You would want to do some careful permissions and thinking about that so that they can't edit each other's work. There are ways to break it down by page, who has access to what. I don't have time to get into all of the details on that, but I do love Google Sites. We're really looking forward to working with our IT department to see if this is a potential tool for an intranet, because that isn't something that's been a possibility before.
So now we've got that. All right, so who gets a lot of emails with tasks in them? I get so many of them. It got to the point where even Active Inbox couldn't handle it, particularly because I wanted to share the tasks with the other people in my group, Emily and Kim and the others. So I started to investigate tools, and I started using do.com. Anyone here using do.com? No, because it's done. One of the problems with using third-party apps is sometimes they go away, as Jason pointed out yesterday. However, Do did have an export, and I was able to export all of my tasks and put them into this new tool called Sauna. Sauna lets me email tasks directly to Sauna, and I can assign them to other people. We then can have a conversation about the task. That's what was happening in other systems we tried, where we couldn't have a conversation about the tasks, where we all got updates as to what was going on. I can assign due dates to the tasks. I can assign projects to the tasks. I've even created my own daily to-do list right here. It tells me what I'm doing now, what's high priority, what I want to talk to someone about. I even put some home tasks in there so I remember to get them done, like pay the bills. This is a free tool. I log into it using my same login as Google Apps for Education, so it's all tied together. As I said, I email things directly from Google to my Gmail to right there, and I can even integrate Google Docs right into tasks, so it all works together. It's a great third-party tool, and it is free.
If I have someone, for instance, with the student organizations who's commonly contacting me directly with a question, but I know that I'm going to be on vacation and I want to make sure that anybody else can answer this question, I forward it to Sauna, I put it into the student orgs project so it's findable, and then I can attach that Google Drive document that I created and shared with the students, make sure my colleagues have access to it, and it's already organized. They can see the email conversation, they can see the document, it's right there. Also, when you're done with something and you check it off, it disappears from your list, but that doesn't mean it's gone forever.
No, it's archived, and we've actually used all of our archived texts for things like, performance reviews. Our research librarians also use their own version. They don't have a liaison program where they have individual. They all share the faculty. When a new faculty request goes in, it goes into their Asana. When it's done, it goes into their archive so they can keep track of the kinds of questions their faculty have asked over time.
And they don't have to worry about whether a faculty member remembers they're supposed to send this question, researched it, whatever. No, they can still get it from the person, but they forward it into this, and then everybody has access to it and can see the internal comments that you want to have around that request. Well, the faculty member doesn't get an email update. You don't have to worry about somebody accidentally hitting reply to all. And if you had forwarded an email to make sure people have access to it, this keeps it in an internal system.
Right, so it's been really convenient for a number of different tasks. All right, very quickly, Google on the go. Yes, Google Apps are available on things like your iPad. If you are an Android user, of course, it's integrated into a lot of Android. If you are an Apple product user, iOS, used to have just one app, Google Drive. They now have 2 additional ones. One for documents, one for spreadsheets. Believe it lets you now edit offline, but those are the apps you'll need to edit docs and spreadsheets. Present, it still works within Drive, and you can see I'm using it to follow the presentation, so I'm not like this the whole time. I can even see my speaker notes. It's quite convenient. If you are a Windows user, sorry, you're out of luck. There is no apps available for the Surface or for Windows Phone. However, on all operating systems, you can still access Google Apps for Education through your browser. And a lot of people like that interface, so that option's available.
We like Google, but Microsoft and Google are not friends right now, so you can't have the toys.
All right, a couple minutes on Hangouts.
Okay, Hangouts. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. As I mentioned, Hangouts was something that wasn't necessarily enabled to begin with. A lot of people think of Hangouts as another version of Skype. I want to emphasize that it can be a whole lot more. There are problems, though, and this is, honestly, a lot of these are problems that are true across any type of web chat thing. So some of them are different. Hangouts now is available in different places, so we were working with the IT staff when this was rolled out again to say, here's what you get if you click on video chat from your email. If you sign up for a Google Plus account, you're going to see slightly different things. Here's how, the number of people that are able to view this video chat changes, for instance. It does require plugins and hardware config. I tried to get a screenshot of this earlier, and I evidently deleted it. But if you click on it for the first time and you've never used it on your computer before, you're going to need to install something that will help it use your webcam or your microphone and your AV stuff. If someone doesn't have access to that, if their computer is really locked down, they're using a lab computer or something like that, or I'm, let's say, using the computer that's in the classroom, I may run into problems. So if you're thinking that this is going to be a one-stop fix for everything, keep in mind this is slightly more complicated. And in terms of Google+, we'll get into that in a second. But this is an example. If you don't have a webcam, screen sharing, awesome. I can choose exactly what I'm sharing. So in this case, I did have a webcam turned on, but I could choose whether I wanted to show everything on my screen, if I just wanted to show Hangouts, which would be a bit recursive, or specific tabs or programs that I had on my computer. So that's handy because you don't have that issue that you might have if you're used to using some other sort of like, I'm just going to duplicate my screen. Oh no, I'm getting notifications. So I could choose just to show one tab that doesn't include all of those things. If you want to do more, if you notice I have things that are turned on here and you're like, I've used Hangouts, I never saw that before. Click on the, again, very minimalist interface, the ... ellipses at the bottom, and you're going to be able to add apps just like the add-ons in Word. So for instance, I think that this one is brilliant to add Google Drive to it so that you could have a verbal conversation around a document while you're editing it. That might be a lot easier. There's other ones if you're using SlideShare and you wanted to share a presentation. You could do that if you had it set up somewhere else. There's even one like this. I've never used this, and I find the possibility of it slightly creepy, but it could be useful if you both trust each other, where you can turn on remote desktop. This could be really useful if I'm talking to my mother and she can't figure out how to do something. It would give both of us, both people would have to have it enabled, so I'd have to walk her through how to turn it on. But we'll see how that goes. So there's other tools, and it can go pretty far. So Google+. Some of you are using Google+ actively. Some of you set up Google+ accounts when it first came out, and you're like, hey, this has potential.
One of you did this.
Some of you don't want to use it. We find Hangouts is very, very functional, and our faculty are very interested in using it. We haven't seen a lot of buy-in from students for Google+ yet. There could be benefits to using Google+ with students. Network-only type sharing for social networks, how great would that be if they were really interested in using it? But I don't want to force people to set up a social networking profile. I don't think that's a super ethical thing to do if they don't understand what the implications are for how their information is going to be viewed online. So the first thing we did was show people how to limit it.
Right, because Hangouts requires profiles.
Yeah, so in the future.
In the future, all right. So what's coming next? Well, we noticed that, hey, there's this Google Classroom, and we're actually not quite sure what it is because we've asked for an invitation, haven't got it yet. If you watch the video, it just says, is this going to do magic? What magic, Google? So, Google Apps for Education is very common in the K-12 sector. For example, my son's grade school uses this, and I think a lot of the tools are going to be geared towards that, trying to help manage the students' submissions from different classes because, like any folder structure, Google Drive folders can get unwieldy quickly. But we do have faculty who are very interested in using Google Drive to share student documents. And I think once we get to experiment with this is coming out in the fall, we'll see if this is something that's be useful for us or not. So we'll start to experiment. Maybe it's going to be useful, maybe it's not, but it is coming in the fall and something you should be aware of. So, if you have any questions or want any demos, we'll stick around. Looks like it's 5 o'clock, so I bet a lot of people want beer or food or something, but we have one person who's interested in chat, so we'll do some chat demos. Any other questions, stick around, and we'll see what we can answer for you. But we are going to put our materials online with links to training materials to about everything that we've talked about today.
Thank you.